I think it said this was Mark part 8. So I have to change my stuff, so we're in part 8. Okay, sorry. I'm not keeping up, I guess. Well, and Ann isn't here. Oh man, I'm answering this question specific for Ann. She asked me some questions, and we'll find out today what they are.
Hallway.
Oh, did you? So maybe she'll come. Anyway, yeah, Ann Harms. The question she asked me is basically, what about is? Right? It is set, and I'll go back over it because it's right where we ended last time, where Jesus gives them the bread, and he said, "This is my body."
This is a Clinton thing.
Yeah, okay. It could be. And where it says, "This is my blood," right? And she said, well, what does is mean? Because Martin Luther, when he wrote it, he said, well, is. So is means it is, right? It's got to be. And I said, well, let's see what it is. Because the comments I made, which I think are more accurate of the Greek, there's some, wiggle room. There's wiggle room about the is, let's say. Okay, kind of like Clinton, yeah. But anyway, so the words of the day I want to give you is this Touto Estin, Estin, Tutestin. What the thing is that this is like in English. You know how in English you go, I am, but instead of I am, you could say I'm. This is Greek like that. So this means it is. It is. Estin is the form of imi. Remember, imi is and ego imi. Exactly, ego imi. Estin is like is, and toto is it or that. That is it is. Indefinite pronoun. So, and see, Ann, I'm going to answer your question because she asked me what does the is. So we'll talk about that. This one is soma, and the reason I wanted soma is because. What's that?
Did you start again?
Yeah, it's blinking. Soma is the body. B-O-D-Y, body. And the reason the body is important is because, remember I always write up here, sarx. It's almost indomitable, right? You know, it's almost permanent. Sarx, suke, and pneuma. We used to, I don't know what we believe anymore, all right? I don't think our society and culture even understands what they believe anymore because they don't believe anything, right? Whatever is. That's good, isn't it? Sarx, suke, and pneuma. In the Hebrew viewpoint, Hebrews believe only in sarx and suke. In the Old Testament, there's only sarx and suke. Maybe I'll teach this, I don't have time to teach it today, but if you go back and you look at the words that are used in Genesis, when God breathed into man, he did not breathe the Ruach HaKodesh. He did not breathe pneuma or his breath. He breathed, what's the word? Nepha. He breathed Nepha into man. And Neph is the same thing he breathed into the animals. So in the Old Testament, the early Old Testament, the view of the Orthodox Jews is that man is only sarx, that's the body, and sukkah, the breath that is not the breath of God, it's the breath of life. And therefore, what happens when you die, according to Orthodox Judaism? You die. There's nothing left. There's nothing after that. It was only later when the Pharisees, by the way, in the apocryphal period, that's why the apocryphal period is so important, when they started getting the Greek worldview, and the Greek worldview, Paul's worldview, Jesus' worldview, man is sarx, suke, and pneuma. So that makes man very special. Now you can take either the Christian, well actually it's not really Christian, you can take the viewpoint of Tin Hodos. Tin Hodos' view in that period is that God graced man with Ruach HaKodesh, with Pneuma, in the time of Acts, or the time of John, take your pick. We haven't studied John yet, but in the Acts, we did do Acts. Remember in the Acts, when the Ruach HaKodesh came upon the disciples, and they spoke in other languages, not unknown tongues, other languages, glossolalia in Greek, and they were given pneuma. So the Tin Hodos view was that man was sarx and suke, and then all of a sudden was granted pneuma by God. That's one view. Yeah. Question?
Real quick question. Sometime after Malachi and before the New Testament, obviously the Pharisees were preaching that there was life after death.
Yes.
Okay, but that view was not there, so that happened sometime in between. Okay, so if that's the case, then this we're trying to figure out where I want to go with that.
Because what you're getting at is exactly right. There are two arguments in this time, and this is what the
Sadducees didn't believe this.
Well, that's right. They're Orthodox.
Right.
So when you died, you died.
Right.
So there are two arguments, though. The number one argument is, and remember, the Sadducees kept coming up with this. How can a person come back to life, right? And so one of the views was, and by the way, this is infused in our worldview too. One of the views is that when you are resurrected by God, you come back as you are, and God gives you back your perfect body and your breath, right?
This was a Hellenistic view, I guess, is what I want to say.
It is a Hellenistic view. The other viewpoint is that the pneuma is the only reality, right? What's a resurrected body? I mean, there are a lot of Christians. My father-in-law didn't believe in cremation because he thought, well, if you're cremated, then your body can't be resurrected properly, right? I mean, that is a view of a lot of Christians. But guess what? After about, 2,000 years, it doesn't matter anyway. I mean, your bones might not even be around, right? So what's the point? The thing is that if you, and you can see, can you see this? The Pharisees' view was there was a resurrection, but they believed in the Greek worldview. You have pneuma, and the pneuma would exist, right?
Animals would not have that.
But animals would not have that. However, animals could be resurrected in this sense, that the body would be resurrected and the breath be returned, right? And we know God could do that because of DNA. I mean, today, in that day, it was a miracle. Today, well, it's still a miracle, but we know that God could take the DNA, your DNA, and remake you and put the breath of life back in you. I mean, this could happen, right? However, everything hinges, I believe, very importantly in, okay, this is touching theology, but it's historical theology, so we're okay, right? The whole worldview of Christianity hinges on pneuma. Does the soul exist? Right? And the Pharisaic view is the soul exists as part of man. That's also the Greek worldview. The worldview of the Sadducees is it doesn't exist. And the worldview of the modern world is that it doesn't exist. Right? A Gnostic worldview says there is no soul. I can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist. Yes, sir.
But they have studied where a person dies and they weigh them when they're dying, and they actually lose a little bit of weight when they die.
Yes, that's great. I was going to bring that up because they have actually done studies, and they have found when a person dies, there is a very slight but measurable, not immaterial reduction in your weight.
21 grams is what I heard.
You heard 21 grams? Isn't that interesting? Just
Is that how
saying.
much my soul weighs?
21 grams. In my books,
We should weigh a little bit.
in my fictional books, I make a real play of this because I make a play of the fact that people can have weight, their souls have weight, and certain creatures have weightier souls than others, like, for example, those that are bound on the earth by God. This is just a side thing, but isn't that interesting that a soul could have weight?
Weighed and measured.
However,
Wanting.
you take your choice, which one you want to believe. I'm like C.S. Lewis, right? C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. You can believe what you want. Pascal's what's it called? His
Paradox? No.
paradox. Pascal's
Sure.
paradox. Yeah. You can believe what you want, but for me, I will believe in the hope of salvation because it's held out to me. Anyway, that's theology too, but that's all right. We'll talk about the other things. But soma. Soma, the body soma, includes sarx, suke, and pneuma. Always in a Greek world view. So when you see the word soma, which we see, that means it all. So if it's just the flesh, it would be sarx. This word, let's see what's, I talked about this, but I decided to give it to you. Artos. The reason I want to give it to you is because I wanted you to see that, remember I mentioned last week, and we'll talk about it this week too, or the week before last, that when Jesus took the loaf, he took a raised loaf. Well, the word artos comes from area, which means to lift up. It means bread that has been raised.
And praise.
No, raised as in a loaf that is a leavened bread. Okay, it's leavened bread. That's what artos means.
But you can have raised bread without yeast.
Yes, and Ann mentioned that. She's like Tammy has probably noticed too, because and maybe you ladies are experts. You can, you can, like for example, you can raise bread with soda and vinegar. You can raise bread with without yeast. You can use baking powder, right? There are other ways to raise bread. However, all of those were considered what by the Jews? All those means.
Non-kosher.
They're considered leaven. Yeah, and so the matzah is supposed to not include any raising. And so now this could also mean, and I talked about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago about different things in the Passover, right? The Passover season. But something I didn't discuss, but is something that might be worth discussing at some point. I won't bring it up too much today. But in the first century, what did they do? I mean, we know what they do now, right? How the Jews celebrate the Passover now. They don't have lamb because they can't sacrifice. That's what I talked about. And the bread they use is always the matzah, right? That's the flat bread with no leaven at all, not any other leavening means. So
you can actually have raised bread with nothing but with flour, water, and salt, basically.
Right, well, that's just
Yeah.
using the air.
Well, yeah, but it's not,
Sourdough.
it's not considered a leavened or a raised bread if it's just flour and salt.
well, you can make sourdough, but that would be a leaven. That would be.
This stuff is actually, wasn't it just
That's why they sweep
Part
the
of
house.
But in any case,
Looking for any.
one might ask the question: Why use that word? I mean, there's other words, right? Where you could qualify it, because it is qualified at the very beginning. Remember, at the beginning it says it is the time of unleavened bread, right? I'm sorry, what did you say, Brett?
I was just saying, as part of the Passover, the father sweeps through the house with a feather looking for any yeast in the air to clean every yeast out of every nook and cranny of the house to make sure that it doesn't find its way.
Right, and as a matter of fact, remember I mentioned a few weeks ago that eating any raised bread during Passover season is one of the unforgivable. So you can't be forgiven. Just saying. Okay, this is interesting. Well, let's look. Okay, you asked me the question about is, and I want to answer the question about is. So let's look at 22. This is 14:22, going back just a couple of verses from where we were before. While they were eating, Jesus Lambano took bread, artos, a loaf, a raised loaf, and gave thanks, eulego, spake well of it, and kleo, break the bread, and gave it to his autos. He gave it to them, not the disciples, to them, autos. Epho, saying, take, it is added. There is no it in this sentence. It says, take, toeste. It is this form, so if I said there is, it's not The it is added. It's toeste. Take this. This is literally that's. That's my soma. My sartsuke and pneuma. All right, now, this is obviously a paradox. Why is this an obvious Greek paradox? Literally, why can this not be Jesus literally?
Because there he sits.
Because he's right there in front of them.
Taking something off of his body.
Right. It doesn't say, I took a knife and chop off my arm and gave it to you. You see? This is a beautiful Greek paradox. Okay? Remember, what's the word I use all the time? Paradox, because Greeks love paradox. And Jesus speaks in paradox all the time. So, this can't be the is. It's totoeste. What does that mean? It means that Jesus is giving us a paradox. And he's saying, literally, he's saying that this is. And this is one of those things. Remember in John, the ego eimi statements? Which he was never no one's supposed to use those ego eimi statements. I mean, very rarely in Greek. This is very similar to that. And this doesn't cause the uproar that it did in John. Remember in John when he said these kind of things? The people just basically went banankas. I mean, they screwed themselves into the ceiling. But we don't see that here.
Is this a comparison to a sacrifice?
I don't think they have a clue yet. I don't think they have the clue. They're not
They may
getting the
not, but
clue.
is this a comparison?
I think it's a foreshadowing. It's a beautiful Greek foreshadowing. Now, why do you think in John, now I know it's wrong, I tell you all the time, don't go between books, but why do you think John's audience was so perturbed, disturbed by Jesus' statement?
Well, for one thing, these were not his intimate friends. It was a large group. And it sounded as though he was talking about literally eating him and literally drinking his blood. And they thought, it was scary.
Well, remember,
And many left.
yeah, well, this is a large group too.
Yeah, but this is his committed disciples that are with him at the Last Supper.
Okay, it's still a large
I
group.
think they've already been through this, and that's when Peter said, and Jesus asked him, "Are you going to leave me too?" And Peter said, "Lord, to whom should we go? You have the words of eternal life." That's when he said it.
Well, it's unfair because we haven't done John, but what's the audience of Mark? Who is the audience of Mark?
Mostly Greeks and Romans.
Greeks and Romans. And who is the audience of John? Just guess.
Jews.
The Jews. So when I give a paradox to the Greeks and the Romans, what do?
They
Oh,
understand.
yeah, I love the terms you're using. They eat it up. They think it is so cool, right? Because he's talking their language to them. He's talking to them literally the way they think, right? It's kind of like when you see a commercial or you hear something where, hate to put this, but a teen, right? A teenager, and someone starts speaking like a teenager, and they're just think that's so cool, right? As long as the person isn't over 20. But when the Jews heard Jesus say, "This is my body," right? Their reaction is, "Bing! You can't say that. You can't do that." You see? And so, in the one case of Mark where the audience is Romans and Greeks, it's not a big deal, right? The big deal is really the incident, where to John, which we should study at some point, is a huge deal. Let's see this. This is my soma. Sorry, they're just really interesting stuff in here. It's just lovely kind of material. Then he lambano. He took the cup, literally the poterion, the drinking vessel, and gave a Eucharisto. So before he gave a eulego, and I told you eulego was probably blessed be he, king of creation, who brings wheat from the ground. That's the eulego, generally the Eucharisto of the Jews at this ceremony, at this event. He took the cup and he Eucharisto. He gave, Eucharisto is much different than a eulego. A eulego is logical words of goodness, right? Of good. And usually, well, a eulego is a eulogy. Eulogy is a eulego. So you speak good about a person. In this case, a Eucharisto is grace. Literally, he's giving good grace. It's a prayerful offering. He offered to them, and they all imbibed. They all imbibed. They didn't take a little sip. They imbibed. They took a big slurp from it. And the Eucharisto is probably, blessed be he, the King of creation, who brings the fruit of the vine from the earth. That is the Eucharisto given usually during this period. But notice, the words are different in Greek. Now, what did we get? He gave thanks in one, and he gave thanks in the other. Well, Shazam! If Mark thought it was important enough to use eulego in one and Eucharisto in the other, I wish the translators would get out there and give us words that have meaning that are different than just throwing words at us, right? I mean, the words are different, so give us some different words, but they didn't. Same word. He offered and they drank from it. They drank heartily from it. And this is what he said. The word is toto. This word right here. Toto, this emi, and it's not ego emi, it's toto emi. So, all right, I'm not trying to teach you Greek or forms of English, right? But this is a different dative clause, okay? This, on the other hand, is the subject of the sentence. So this is, literally this is or that is, as opposed to that's in the dative sense. Okay, I'm not going to even explain that. Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's all right. It's just English. So this is, my is added. This is blood. Hamia of, the is added. Kanos, of kanos. It doesn't, my is not anywhere in this. There is no form of my in this. Literally, this is the blood, or literally blood of the new and fresh diatake, covenant, contract, which is poured out, ekkeo, for many. He epoed to them. So, Jesus didn't say it was his blood. The implication, however, is what? It's a sacrifice. Yes, there's a sacrifice. Now, I don't know how deep I want to get into this. You guys realize it's a big deal. There's no huge deal about the flesh, right? Eating the bread. I mean, that's a beautiful paradox. There is a big thing about the blood. What's the big deal about eating the blood?
The life blood is where the life was, and that was a big no-no.
You could not drink the blood of the sacrifice. You could not eat the blood of a sacrifice. Yep, and you had to. By the way, okay, I'm very happy we're not Jewish people from that period, because you know how they had to eat their sacrifice meat? It was boiled. Oh, and the only way to boil this stuff, well, actually, the original Passover they could roast it. So they actually had something reasonable to eat, right? But they roasted everything. Can you imagine, you ladies, do you roast everything when you roast meat?
No.
No, you clean it. Can you imagine? And you had to eat everything, right? Who gets the intestines? I don't want the intestines. Who wants this part? I don't want that part. Oh, you had to eat everything, right? When you ate it, except the bones and the hide. So it's like, oh, that's kind of gross. But then later, when they had, the big deal about the temple was they had pots. And if you have a pot, you can boil stuff. And so I guess because nobody got anything to eat that was boiled, it was a big deal. Oh, we're going to go have some boiled, whatever, lamb. Ew. But anyway, so they boil the whole thing. Oh, that could be tasty, right? What do I get? Yeah, special party. Anyway, but the blood was really important because the blood could not be eaten. That's Jewish kosher. So when Jesus said this, he said something. Number one, you notice he didn't say my, but he did say blood. So what is he asking them to do? Something that is not kosher and is countercultural. Now, if you want another argument for why the kosher rules don't necessarily apply, here's one for you, but that's okay. It's kind of embedded in it. But it's interesting that it's poured out for many. And of course, this is a foreshadowing also. It's a sacrificial foreshadowing, but it's also a paradox. Because whether it's his blood he's talking about, he's obviously talking about the sacrifice of himself, right? That's obviously what the foreshadowing is about. So the implication, it is his blood. But like I said, so this is a paradox also. But he's also asked them to do something that they shouldn't do.
It was the blood in the Passover originally that saved the people from the death angel.
They didn't eat it because
They had painted on the.
Or simple.
So it was.
That's right.
They
So,
sprinkled on
and
the
so
altar.
it is his blood in sacrifice.
They
which
put
is
it on
gonna
the
take
doorpost.
place the next day.
Drinking and putting on the doorpost.
Yeah. They took a hyssop branch with the blood, they dipped it, and they did the top of the lintel and the sides. Whoa. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Just saying. Just saying. Cool. This is cool stuff, isn't it?
How different, each book talks about the final meal, Matthew, and how different is the wording between the books? Have you ever looked at that?
It isn't that significantly different, but that is something, I should have brought Matthew, because we studied Matthew, and that would be fair, because we looked at Matthew before. So that would be a fair thing, because we looked specifically at the words. It would not be fair, and this is what, as a scholar of ancient Greek documents, and that's what we should all be, right? It is really not kosher for us as scholars to look at Matthew and say, let's compare it to Mark, Luke, and John. Not at this stage. Where you do that is, remember you have the bibliographical test, and then you have the internal and the external test. We are at the internal test, right? What we're doing is we're looking cohesively at the language in the document. So when we finish and get all the cohesiveness out of the language of the document, and what does the document say, right? From a Greek standpoint, logos to telos. Now we could go back and we could compare them, because that's the external test, right? The external test is where you take documents of equal or near equal certainty of each other, and then you compare those documents to see how they fit. Now, what do we do if we don't think they fit?
Depends on who the we is that you're talking about. And other people say, well, these don't hold together.
Well, if it's a primary versus a secondary source, then the primary source always wins, right? The tertiary source always loses anyway. But for example, whatever Luke says, or whatever Mark says, we would take that with a little bit less authority than we would Matthew or John, because Matthew and John were primary sources. I would argue that Mark may be a primary source too.
Agreed. Part of it anyway, is certainly.
Probably most of it, but yeah, a lot of it would be a primary source. So we might argue Mark is. However, guess what? We don't find huge differences. The differences we find is, remember, Greek is a logos to telos. If you look at it as a logos to telos, you don't have any problems. Because you got to realize that what the Greek writer is trying to do is give you the information in a logos to telos. If you look at it like English, you're going to be a failure. You're not going to be able to get a clue about it. Because you'll ask questions that that we as English speakers and writers always ask. Well, who was really at the tomb? What does a Greek guy say?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter who was at the tomb. What matters is the logos to telos. What matters are the events, not who was there, who saw it, you know, who killed whom, you know, that's my Python story. You know, the big deal is there could have been lots of, it's just like this. You know, we read it and we realize that there are lots of disciples, right? That's the impression. But yet when we read it in English, what's our impression?
It's just 12.
Yeah, there's just those 12
And
guys
there's a
there.
lot of paintings that just show 12.
Right. And they're sitting in chairs too. You know, they don't have any chairs. Remember, they're in a steron, so they're in a room that's strewed with pillows and rugs, you know. So anyway, the problem is usually not the document. The problem is usually our understanding of the document. Or we're reading a translation, and guess what? The translation may or may not be that great. So that's what we got to be cautious about.
Maybe Martin Luther wasn't right to translate. Maybe.
I love Martin Luther. We should probably change the name of the Lutheran Church because people think we worship Luther, especially in other countries that are, you know, foreign countries.
Called Lutheranism.
Yeah, and Lutheranism. So we worship Luther. Remember, if we were
Taoist.
a Mysterion, if we were a Mysterion, the Greeks would say, "Oh, Luther is your God," or "Luther is your leader." Okay, anyway. But Luther didn't know very good, he was not a very good Greek scholar. What did he know? Latin and German. And so basically, he took the Douay, the Latin translation, and he translated it into German with a little help from his friends. And his friends weren't that great Greek scholars. And the Greek scholarship was not that great until Strong's and Vines. Strong's and Vines and Woodhouse before that. Woodhouse is really the father of Greek language. And so it's not that we didn't understand. There's a lot of Greek speakers who understood the Greek very well. It's just that translating it into English and other languages is always a problem. And that's what I try to point out to you. I'm trying to show you, not that the translations are great failures. You should read your translations. But yet, you know, I recommend interlinear texts, especially for those that are willing to go the extra mile, looking at the words, looking at the documents, looking to see what they really say. Because that's what you want, right? Ever since I was a kid, not quite this small, when I was a teenager, my greatest desire was, I want to know what they say, right? The first time anybody said they're Greek, I'm like, they're Greek? Really? I thought that Paul and Silas were speaking English and wrote it down, right? Like, I didn't know that was Greek.
And there were translations too.
And so I always wanted to know what does the Greek say. So what I'm trying to do is, this is my journey, right? Too, as an educator, I take what I can find out and dig up and try to give you the information that I got so you don't have to do it yourself. But that's what's fun about it.
That was also part of your education 100 years ago. We've lost all of that.
That's a true statement. The educated person in America used to know enough Greek and Latin that they could get around with the language. Today, people can barely speak English in the schools. I mean, do they teach English anymore?
Yes, remedial English.
I don't know. They don't teach spelling, that's for sure.
USD 259, they've had, you know, lowest scores in the state, math, reading, and writing.
Look, when the average person that, anyway, writes me emails, and don't take this as an offense, don't know the difference between me, myself, and I. You know, there is a serious issue, and they can't use who and whom either. But that's another whole thing, you know, who uses who. But anyway, and you hear it all the time, even from people in debates and political figures. I'm sorry, I'm not a thing here. Anyway, 25. I Lego you, amen. I Lego you the truth. I Lego you the truth. So before it was an Lego, it was an epo. I said, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew. Kanos. The same word as used before about the new covenant, the new contract. Kanos. In the basilia of God. This is a paradox too. Why is this a paradox? What is happening right now that Jesus said would happen in the era of the Son of Man? What has he been preaching?
The
Kingdom of God is near.
Yeah, not near. The kingdom of God is coming together. The kingdom of God is coming together.
Heaven on earth.
So what we need to look for is if Jesus drinks from the vine. Now, it may not be necessarily pertinent to Mark, but what happens in, well, you know it, right? What happens in Matthew and Luke and in John?
Sponge with the sour wine.
The sponge, and also in the other ones, remember, he ate and drank with them. Right? I mean, this isn't an accident. It isn't an accident. Remember I told you, Jesus said in this generation you'll see the destruction of the temple, which obviously meant the paradox of his death and resurrection. Right? What he didn't say was he's going to destroy the temple, but yet what would happen? It would be the temple would be raised again. He is the temple. He is the sacrifice. He is the high priest. Anyway, there's more to this. There's more to this. 26. When they had sung a hymn, literally when they had sung a religious ode, they went to the Mount of Olives. Now this is very interesting. They went to the Mount of Olives. On your chart, I gave you a chart, and I know the chart's getting smaller and smaller, trying to fit it
And a
into the
mile
thing.
to the east.
You see where it says Garden of Gethsemane? It is not a garden. It is not a garden of Gethsemane. I'm going to tell you what Gethsemane is in a minute. We'll get to that. But it is not a garden, but that's about where the Mount of Olives is. The Mount of Olives is you see where it says Mount of Olives? Olivet? That's, the hill that's right outside of Jerusalem that has olives on it. Let's talk about this. They say him, 27. You will fall away, literally scandalizo. You will be entrapped, and they left out this night. You will be entrapped this night, this nooks. Why did they pull that out? I don't know. This night. Jesus legoed them. This is very important. For it is written, I will smite. This is an ambiguous word. I will smite. The shepherd, the poem, the shepherd, and the sheep, the probaton, will be diasporpizo. Diaspora. Diacorpizo. They will be dissipated. They'll be winnowed. So when I winnow, this is very interesting words because this comes from, well, you know where it comes from. Where does it come from? This is from LXX. This is from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew text. And I'm going to read you the Hebrew text in a second. But strike, I have to mention this. In the Old Testament, the commandment is thou shalt not strike. It doesn't say thou shalt not murder. It does not say thou shalt not kill. The word is thou shalt not. This word in Hebrew, which in Greek is translated as patasso. Patasso is kind of an ambiguous word because it doesn't necessarily mean to kill. It means to intentionally strike. The reason this is important is in the Hebrew, when it says thou shalt not murder, it means I shall not hit anyone with the intent to kill. That's why when Jesus said, let them strike you, if they strike you this way, it's in Mark, then ask them to strike you this way. If I strike you this way, it's the way I strike a slave or a person that's under me. If I strike you this way, it's smiting. The commandments say, what happens to me if I smite? If you smite, what happens to you? They kill you. Smiting, in other words, striking a person with the intent to do what? Harm them is what the commandment is.
That's in our legal system, too.
Is it? Well, they certainly don't act like it. There's a lot of people out there smiting, and they're killing, and they're smiting, and they're still smiting, Anyway, what's really interesting about this is the words that are used. To smite, the shepherd, the poem, and the potatbon, the sheep, will be diasporcorzo. They'll be dissipated. They'll be winnowed. Winnowed. You know how you winnow wheat to get the chaff out? It is a very different meaning than scattered, because the assumption is, okay, if you're the sheep and you're winnowing the sheep, all right. Anyway, if the sheep are obviously the imagery is they are the what that you're winnowing.
good from the bad.
They're the good from the bad, yeah. And so when I winnow by throwing it up into the air, the bad stuff gets scattered away. It's not the sheep that are scattered, right? The sheep are winnowed. So the ones who are the problem go away, and the ones who are the good guys stay there. But look what Jesus said at the beginning. You will all, scandalizo, be entrapped this night. This night. This quote comes from Zechariah. Let's see, how much I guess I could read most of this. On that day a fountain, it's Zechariah 13. On that day a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and impurity. All right, he just did what? He just said, this is blood of the new covenant, right? On that day a fountain will open to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On that day I will banish the names of the idols from the land, and they will be remembered no more, declares the Lord Almighty, literally Yahweh. I will remove both the prophets and the spirit of impurity from the land. You what it said? I will remove both the prophets and the spirit of impurity from the land.
Good and bad.
I'd worry if I was a disciple. And if anyone still prophesies, his father and mother to whom he was born will say to him, you must die, because you have told lies in the Lord's name. When he prophesies, his own parents will stab him. On that day, and this is why they don't read the rest of this, right? On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his prophetic vision. He will not put on a prophet's garment or hair in order to deceive. A garment of hair in order to deceive. He will say, I am not a prophet, I am a farmer. The land has been my livelihood since my youth. That's pretty good. If someone asks him, what are these wounds on your body? He will answer, the wounds I was given at the house of my friends. What's this image? The wounds of my body. What's that about? No. The prophets of Baal would wound themselves, right, to get their prophecies, right? Okay?
No pain,
7.
no gain.
Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is close to me, declares the Lord Almighty. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones. That's the Hebrew from the translation, NIV. Very different than what the Septuagint is, right? Very different. But let's see it again. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it. This third I will bring into the fire, will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. Like I said, remember, rabbinic context. Whenever you see any quote, look back. Now, I wish we all had our Septuagints. We could pull them open and see what it says in the Greek. Luckily, Jesus quotes the Septuagint, so we don't have to do that. But if you were to read this in the Greek, it'd probably take me forever to get finished with this class. We'd be here for another 10, how many years, right? But what's really interesting is when you go back and review, because remember, when the people hear Jesus quote any scripture, what are they immediately doing?
The entirety.
They're going back to the entirety of the piece. And so we should probably read all of Zechariah, but I didn't. 28. But after I have Egerio, after I have risen, rise up, Egerio, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Now, look, wait a second. He did not say Egerio ek nekros, right? He didn't say rise from the dead. So what do they think he's saying?
I'm gonna get up and go.
Yeah, when I'm finished sleeping or whatever I'm doing, right, I'm going to go to Galilee. That's what they hear, right? What do we hear? Who knows? Why would he go to the Galilee? Why go to Galilee? There's some really important things here. Number one, this shows the very important tie of Jesus to the Galilee. And remember, he has a host of people that followed him from Jordan, right? From the Jordan. They went up from the Jordan. They went up through Jericho. They followed him, a bunch of folks. But guess where most of his followers are? In the Galilee. Also, Remember, there are the 4 schools of Judaism. Jerusalem is one of them. The Galil is another one. And also, there's another group that was really important and popular in the Galil.
Egypt and Damascus, the other two.
The Essenes. So, Jesus, for some reason, is telling them the Galil. Now, like I said, in the Greek, this is just simple. When I wake up, when I get up tomorrow, I'm going to the Galil. So the disciples are probably thinking, well, tomorrow Jesus is going to be gone. We'll go look for him in the Galil, I guess, right? I don't know. That's literally what it says. And this is what Peter says, 29. Peter may have gotten a little bit of it. Peter gave his opinion. He declared. He gave his opinion. Even if all scandalizo are entrapped, I will not. I will not. 30. Jesus said, I tell you the truth. Amen. Jesus Lego. Today, yes, this nooks. Remember he said nooks before. Before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will aperitomai. You will deny me utterly 3 times. Remember Mark 13:35 at the very end of the chapter about destroying the temple? What did he say? 35 says, therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether the evening or the midnight, or when the rooster crows, or at dawn. That whole chapter was a foreshadowing for what happens now. And to understand what is going to happen, we got to understand this. 31, but Peter insisted. He uttered emphatically, ek perisos, again and again. He said it over and over again. Even if I have to die with you, suna apkonesko, die together with you, I will never disown you. And then what did it say? And all the others said the same. Look, it isn't just Peter. Remember, I told you, Peter is the foe in the dialogue. He's in the Greek dialogue. He's the guy that basically, he's the comedic guy
Carries the conversation.
that puts the conversation in place. And look what all the others said the same. It's not just the 12 either, it's all the others, right? And it wasn't just the disciples, the 12, that got the cup and the bread. It was all the others. So Jesus is going to Olivet, to the Mount of Olives, with a whole bunch of guys and people, his followers, all right? What the Greek is telling us, it's not just the 12, it's not just Peter, it's all of it. And you notice in Zechariah, it says 1/3 will be left. Isn't that interesting? Kind of interesting. 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane. Anybody know what Gethsemane means? I should have given it to the word of the day, but I didn't because I think this is cool. What does Gethsemane mean in Hebrew? Olive press. Oil press. For some reason, people think this is a garden. It's not a garden. Look, Mount of Olives. What do you have to have on a Mount of Olives? Olive trees. And what do you now to do with those olives? Well, you could eat them, but you press them to make oil. If you don't press them to make oil, they get rotty, right? And you can't put them in your refrigerator, to make martinis with. You got to get the oil out of them so you can keep the oil. Because they didn't eat what in this culture? Anyone know what they didn't eat in the culture? Butter. Why do they have a problem with butter?
Milk.
Butter and milk. What's the problem with butter and milk? It gets rancid. Yeah, because it's a hot climate. And so, guess what olive oil does? Keeps forever. You know what they did in the Scandinavian countries? You know what they used as a preservative in most Scandinavian countries? Butter. Butter is a wonderful preservative. You can actually stack stuff in butter. Of course, they stacked like mackerel and kippered herring. And the butter was probably, Mom, I don't want any of that butter, right? Of course, as you're a kid, you're like, give me anything, I'm dying, right? Anyway. Olive oil, yeah. You'd rather have olive oil. But they didn't have olives in Scandinavia, so you can't do that. They went to a place called the oil press. The oil press. Literally, they went to the oil press. They didn't go to the place called the oil press. We think Gethsemane is like some place, right? The Garden of Gethsemane. No, they went to the oil press in Olivet. Now, why would they go to the oil press in the Olivet?
Easily recognized location. Your GPS will take you there every time.
Probably Siri could find it. Who's going to be there? be people roaming around in, Mount of Olives? Maybe not. Who would do that? But, nobody's going to be the oil press because that's where you work. You don't be working at night. So they went there because it was probably a solitary place. It's kind of, Jesus legoed to his disciples, sit here while I pray. Literally, pro eskomai, make my wishes known. Sit here while I pray. Not just the 12, all of them. This is a big place. There probably wasn't, there may have been a shelter there, maybe not, but, there was the oil press, there may have been a shelter from the heat for the olives and for the people, but there's enough room there, and it's, and what is it? Is it sloped or is it flat?
It's sloped, definitely.
No, it's flat, because
Not where I saw it.
then they weren't at the right place. Because
Well, they could have missed.
when you have an oil press, right, what's the point of an oil press?
You gotta press the oil out of the olives.
Right, and you can't put the olives on the slope with an oil press because they'll roll down the hill, right? The reason they probably stayed here is because it was a flat area, and that's why the oil press would be in that area, right? It was either made flat or it was a flattened area in the thing. So if they took you to an area that was not flat, it's either it had great upheavals in the land or it's not the right place. Because this was not a garden, it was an oil press.
Now, what time of year was it, of course, as well? Are they working and pressing oil, or is this off season?
It could be the off season, because remember this is coming into the spring, so there may have not been any olives on the trees anyway.
No virgin oil.
Probably not anything. Or it could have been really early crop. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not the figs we know weren't, right? But I don't know about olives. Anybody an olive expert? Know any olives are up there? Okay. He took in 33. He paralambano. He took near to him Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed. Ek thambano, utterly astonished. Okay, it says literally he was not distressed, he was ek thambano, he was astonished and sated to loathing. Why would Jesus be utterly astonished and sated to loathing? The words are not, he was distressed and troubled. The words are, he is astonished and sated to loathing. What would make him, what is the most, okay, I'm going to blow your minds, because in the Greek it does not say what we think it says in the English. The English is, the translation of the NIV is absolutely incorrect. And the impression it gives you is entirely wrong. What is Jesus' greatest worry at this moment in time?
And he's gonna have to go to the cross and die.
No. He told them from the very beginning, I am going to go to the cross, I'm going to die and be resurrected. I'm going to die and be resurrected. I'm going to die and resurrect. What is he worried about?
That he might.
The disciples, what? What is he worried about?
They're going to fall away and be scattered.
In Mark, look, Mark took a whole chapter. Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives with his disciples, and they asked him about when the temple would be destroyed. And Jesus went through a whole thing, and his conclusion, the telos of that whole thing was, therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. And then the last thing he told to Peter, he said, I tell you the truth, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. Why is Jesus deeply, utterly astonished and sated to loathing? Judy said it. He is really, Tammy said that Jesus is completely worried that when he dies, what will happen to all of his followers? They will be scattered and not winnowed. They will go away. Because if they go away,
The message goes away.
the message goes away, everything that's meaningful goes away. If they fail, it's the end. And it's not the end of his movement. I don't think Jesus cares about the movement, right? What's the whole point? This is salvation of the world, right? It's salvation. Do you have a...
Well, does this does this bring up free will? That it still is, they still have the ability to choose, or,
Of course they do.
so they could fail?
Exactly. Not just fail. I mean, each of us. I mean, I hate the Calvinist worldview. The Calvinist worldview drives me nuts because I met young people that say, it doesn't matter. God will take care. God will do it. God will provide. God will do this. Look, if you don't get off your duff and work your tail off for God, He's not going to do anything. You might be the next Billy Graham, but if you don't get your education and go out and do it, well, what's going to happen? Nothing at all. You might have been the next Billy Graham, right? You might have been the next Mother Teresa. You might have been the next, whether you like her or not. Either way, you might have been the next, President of the United States. You might be the next this or that or the other thing. But if you don't do it, what do you think is going to happen? You're suddenly going to get the lottery, or God's going to send you notes. Oh, you got into Oxford, right? Or you got into, Princeton, or you got into whatever. I mean, it only happens to people like, Kerry or others, right? Or Clinton, who got his Oxford papers, for his scholarship. How do you do that? Anyway, normal human beings, that doesn't happen. But I guess there are people in the world that does happen to, but they're not good people necessarily. The point I'm making is that, yes, there is a chance. We assume what? The disciples are just such nice guys.
Fated.
And they're fated. But the message of Paul, the message of the Gospels is what about fate?
You can change it.
Fate doesn't exist. That's the point. Fate is not, we're not animus. We have a Lord God Almighty, and it's not fated, right? If you are convinced, what happens? Right? And then, of course, we always say it in our thing, right? What do you do when you're changed? Well, if you just sit there and twiddle your thumbs, nothing's going to happen, right? So what happened? What do we say? You haven't changed. The reason I know you changed was because you went and did something about it.
Good old James.
Yeah.
By their word.
Good old James and Jude, right? Well, Jesus is the same way, right? Jesus has been with these guys. You've got the whole mark, the logos to telos. He wants the telos to be what?
So to be convinced.
To be convinced and do it, right? Convinced and do. And so we will look at this in greater detail next week. Is next week the
It's the birthday of Jesus.
birthday? I usually do a class in, so if you want to come. I'll be prepared. I will go over this because I think this is really important, and we'll continue to move along. But I just want you to know, think about this, reread it, and see what is Jesus' real concern. He's not concerned about death. He's not concerned about his death at all. And the Greek will tell us that. We'll look at that more closely. Thank you, Father, for your word. Pray you give us a great week this week. In your name we pray, amen.
That's always troubled me. I always thought, why was he all of a sudden